Rune, welcome to Pantria.
Thank you. I'm enjoying it already.
You're just saying that to be polite. I am really excited for two reasons. The first being that you actually were someone who had a very important and big part in my move to Denmark. And I was part of and having a first seat row to the journey with Spiir and Aiia through the acquisition to Mastercard as well, which we're going to talk about today. And the second one being that this is the first episode in a very small mini-series that I'm calling Excit, where I'll basically go behind the scenes of the startup life, going beyond the champaign and glam and talking more about what it actually means to build something, but also perhaps what disappear or at least change afterwards. That leads me to why we sit here today, which is because of what happened earlier this week. Because it was announced that Spiir, which we'll dive into in a moment, is going to be closed down. So are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. And Rune, let's start by going back to 2011. Building Spiir before open banking even existed as a term as we know it today, and what you believed then that most people, thought was wrong. Just bring me back to the early days of you founding Spiir with your two co-founders, please.
Yeah, actually it was in 2009 that I came up with the idea. I was doing my own finances, like in the post to a big housing collapse world. So I was trying to figure out like why I could have like a highly paid job, and my wife had one too, and we never had any kind of spare cash. So I was doing like a full financial overview. So I ended up taking out all the transactions from my bank accounts or from both of our bank accounts, and then like going through them meticulously, trying to understand like what are we spending money on. And then I realized that there's like 2,000 transactions, something you have to go through there, that I could categorize it, right? So in an Excel spreadsheet, I started doing all these roles. So it like Circle K is gas, supermarket, this is groceries and stuff like that. And then I built a chart that showed me like how much money every month I spend on gas. And then I was just like, why didn't I know that?
Yeah.
Like, it's so simple, right? And why didn't I know that? So that thought became eventually Spiir, actually. I kept going around. I was working at that time as a head of product and development at eBay. But I kept thinking about that. It cannot be that we can live in a world where money is increasingly virtualized into like mortgages you don't have to pay off and stuff like that. So you don't know how much money you actually need to support your life. And then on top of that, everything becomes subscriptions, and like brands are getting stronger and stronger and has more and more platforms. Like at that time in 2009, Facebook was just coming around, right? And I realized, okay, these platforms will kind of flood us with brands eventually, and noise and stuff like that. So I figured out that we had to build that categorization engine and then build something on top that was so beautiful and attractive that people would start using it, because I knew that we were up against all the banks, right? I remember in a early stage podcast in Denmark, actually, a tech podcast, I told the host, Anders, that it's a bit like going to New York. Like you go in there and then you stand and look at all the skyscrapers, right? You never see the sky. That was the sense we had when we started Spiir, like, and the skyscrapers, they were the banks. And so trying to figure out how to navigate that world was super important for Spiir to become a success. But it was born out of an idea that I wanted control of my own finances. And then I realized no one really had the levers to control their own finances unless they wanted to do all the tedious work, right? So like removing the tedious work, making very apparent like how you spend your money, was the idea behind Spiir, actually.
And then it turned into Aiia, the open banking aggregator, the player. And how did that switch happen?
I think that happened around 2016 or something, where we actually fleshed out the whole kind of aggregation engine for the bank's APIs. At that time, it was like proprietary APIs that we reverse engineered. And I thought in the beginning that this was our goal, like the ability to actually get the financial data out of the banks was something that would built a lot of moat around Spiir. But then I started thinking about that. Like Spiir became more and more segments in itself. Like we realized we couldn't solve just because everyone had a personal finance going on back home. We couldn't solve it for everyone, right? So we started like segmenting down to like the city dwellers, 18 to 35-year-olds and stuff like that. Then I realized like, okay, all the other companies out there that could be building stuff like Spiir that would help citizens of the different countries in the EU, they should be able to do that, right? And then I came up with the idea, like, why don't we build an infrastructure product out of like the connectivity part of Spiir? And that became Nordic API Gateway. That was a name we came up with over 2 beers one night that we quickly had to launch the service. And eventually, when we had time, that became the Aiia brand, which was a pretty nice brand.
Yeah, I think so too. And I wanted to hear, because I think sometimes, especially in the media, we hear about all the glory and we hear about all the, the fundraising and all the achievements and the success stories, right? And I think sometimes we're romanticizing the startup journey. But what would you say that journey for you from Spiir and also evolving into Aiia and so on, what would you say that cost you personally to build all of that up over the decade?
I think a lot about like what I call the founder's dilemma. Like being a founder means two things. Right? You're building a company that either has to grow big and become an operational unit that will give you back like a surplus on the revenue side eventually, right? Or you're building something that needs to exit at some point in time. That's one side of it, right? That's about the money. And then the other part is about your ideas, like what you want to do in the world, right? We're here for, I don't know, 40,000 days probably today with the help of AI. So what do you want to do during those 40,000 days? And I realized that like working for big corp, that wasn't for me. I wasn't cut out to do that because I had all these strange ideas and I wanted to express myself. So like being in a position where sometimes you have to hand over your company to someone else because they will pay you a lot of money and they will have a lot of money to kind of like put it to next level. It's the natural thing to do. But if you look at your ideas and your creativity, it might be the opposite that you really wanted to do, right? And I think I've always been caught in that kind of dilemma, like how do we solve the core problem of users or customers out there? And why do we do it? Like what kind of societal impact do we have? And then on the other side, it's about money. So if you look at Spiir, we were actually terrible at generating a business on top of Spiir, right? It never really made us money, but Aiia did, right? But if I look as like from deeply rooted perspective, if I have to be honest, I really loved the idea of Spiir, right? Way more than Aiia. Aiia was a product that I really put a lot of effort into and enjoyed creating together with you guys. But it was more like we have to do this so others can unleash their creativity, right? So it was way more kind of like a classic B2B pivot company that pretty quickly took off and became something important in the world. But I kept thinking about that little green Spiir guy that we created as a mascot for the Spiir platform. And why didn't he really solve the things? Why didn't AI move as fast as it should, according to my thoughts, right? I built the whole assistant kind of approach based on the idea that I thought Siri would become an AI that would use apps as memory plugins, right? So I wanted to prepare Spiir for being a memory plugin for Siri, and it never happened. But I think it's about to happen now with the AI assistants. Yeah. So I think it's a super tough journey for people that build something from ground up because they're caught in that dilemma. And whenever you speak about it, people they start like taking out the violin, right, and saying like, yeah, don't be sorry. You made a lot of cash and you became a success. Yeah, that's one side of it. The other side is like, end of the day, the money, like they can buy you things, right? But your ideas, they're still there. Like, who's going to solve what Spiir didn't solve? Spiir solved a lot. I saw on the forums that people like almost crying because they've been spending the last 10 years with Spiir, and it was an integral part of their family's way of doing finances, right? And all of a sudden they are looking into losing that ability. And one even said, I'll just go back to become a money abuser then, because that's what I was before Spiir, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel obligated, like I don't know, like a politician must feel obligated to kind of solve issues for the society that they represent, right? I feel that, did I leave something behind that was important to a lot of people? So I just hope that someone else will pick up that and create new platforms. And perhaps with Spiir now gone soon, it might unleash like a whole array of different approaches to how to solve that. But I noticed like Bliss, a new budget app, and there was also My Money app from the personal finance advisor. So there is things happening in that space now. But I want more to happen, because if you have 10 different approaches, they will compete about being the best. And then eventually someone will solve the big issues, right?
Take me back to the moment where you decided, or the team decided, that there should be an exit strategy, and that dilemma that you were in as a founder.
It's actually two moments. And the first one is more like just to give you an insight into being a founder. It's not always being like the guy with the full vision and stuff like that, because a lot of people think that too. Like you're heading the orchestra, right? You know exactly how they should be played, like all your people and stuff like that. You don't know that. It's a very messy thing to create something from nothing, right? When we got our first investor, Lars Collin, I was super proud about bringing him to the team. He insisted on creating these articles of association for the company that had a kind of a paragraph about Excit. And we had a discussion of that, and then he thought it would be feasible to put in, like, within 5 years we will try to exit Spiir. And I think like Thomas and Gudmundur and I were just like, yeah, sure, like just put that in. Like we don't know what that means, right? Like we're not here to exit. No, because at that time in 2010, like the whole investment community and the startup ecosystem was not really there. Like we created things ourselves and tried to get some help from here and there, but and tried to network. But there wasn't all these kind of institutions like Copenhagen FinTech or stuff like that. So we had to come up with things ourselves. And we wanted to build Spiir to become an operational company that generated a lot of revenue and solved a lot of issues for families out there. So we just said, yeah, 5 years, that's fine. And then later on, we started like maturing and realizing what is actually the idea behind articles of association and why is that a very important structured document for a startup and stuff like that. And then I think around 2015, 4 years in, we started having the discussions like what we want to do. Like, do we want to try to create this ourselves? How much money do we need? Should we bring in investors, like bigger investors than just angels and stuff like that? And then we took in a couple of angels more. So we had like a circle of 4 angels on the investor side. And with them, we started fleshing out the idea of like, what would be important for who to own that we could produce. And that eventually actually became Nordic API Gateway and then Aiia. And in the beginning, the whole idea was that Nordic banks, they would love to sit on top of an infrastructure like that, trying to protect themselves against like American interests and I don't know, French, Italian interests, and even Norwegian today interests, right? And that was the early stage investment strategy for the company. So we ended up having Danske Bank and DNB from Norway as our main owners, right? And they owned a fair share of the company and then the idea was to bring in a third bank, and then they could actually flick the switch and take majority and own the company. And we never brought in the third bank. Instead, we ended up talking to Mastercard, and then that became the exit path.
So from 2015 to 2021, where that acquisition by Mastercard happened, did that feel like a success? And was it as you had expected as you were starting on that exit journey?
I think we spent 3 years actually talking to different parties before ending with Mastercard. Um, and many of them were super advanced. We even had like another buyer that where the whole kind of board of directors, they had to go to their board to get approval on a business case they built for themselves. And they like the CEO of that company, it was a big bank-owned company. He said, "This is just a matter of going in and getting a yes." And then they went in and they got a no. And we like wasted 11 months of really hard work. And at that time we were, I don't know, around 50 people or something. But spending 11 months with a company that looks at you from a buyer's perspective, that means you need to keep pushing. Like you need to keep growing and get more customers and stuff like that. Keep kind of proving that you're the right thing for them to own, right? So I couldn't kind of like bring in my whole team to do these things. So we were like 3 or 4 guys, like building all the materials and then running the company. Besides that, like with the super hard process. The Mastercard process was actually really, really great. I actually think that Mastercard itself are really, really good at doing these processes, to be honest. Like bringing in an integration team and then setting up like different small groups that like integrates themselves with a lot of autonomy and all that. That was a clever thing to do, I think. So I really enjoyed that process. And many people, they keep saying to me, like, when we sit here in my house, right, where I can talk freely, that you really didn't want to sell, did you? Like, did you really want to sell to Mastercard? And it's just like, yeah, I actually think it was a good idea to sell to Mastercard. I think that they needed what we had so much that it would be like empowered in there. And all the people that joined my journey and the company's journey, they would be empowered in there, right? And today, like I talk a lot with people that still are in there, like working for Mastercard now, that has like nice careers, like not like very old, like 30-year-old guys that are like doing really well in Mastercard. And that pleases me to know that I built something that also created that opportunity for someone, right?
Yeah.
And I stumbled upon you, right? You were in France at that time and doing a lot for a completely different industry at that time. And then like having you come back to Copenhagen and joining the team and what we did together there was just amazing. And I think it like formed the way we are today in ways that is hard to get if you're just in a kind of structured organization and setup, right? Not that that is bad or anything, but it's just a different thing, right? You are more predefined in your role when you go into a big company.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
It is a much more. You are more. There's more freedom to change direction and be able to accelerate on certain things because you don't have that tight structure, and you probably you also have the hierarchy is just flatter as well. So being in a startup is for sure fun. It is just a different beast than being in a corporate. And I wanted to ask Rune, because now we talk about the acquisition of Mastercard as well. How was that like? Because I remember, the party, the fun. I also remember that we sometimes felt like we had to perform when the US came visiting. How did you feel after the acquisition? How was that like when you were on that other side? You actually achieved that exit that you have been working towards since 2015.
I think for a long time I was pretty schizophrenic, like not clinically, but more like as a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
But I think that on one side I was like super proud that like I kept thinking about like, oh, this little guy that grew up in southern Denmark, like he ended up building something that a multinational company wanted to own and actually acquired for a lot of money. So on that side, I was super happy. I was super proud about like going back to my family and saying to them, like all the years you invested into this, like by not seeing me, I'm paying it back now, right? So instead of coming back and saying like I really tried hard, but I failed, I'm happy that you supported me, right? I could actually say, here, now we can like do what we want with our lives because you let me do this, right? Because I was away a lot, like also for the kids. And then on the other side, I felt hollowed out, like there's like all that creativity that you like one-to-one every day put in front of you, and that you need to put in front of you and manage. All of a sudden, I didn't need to do that anymore, and like doing that was not doing that was super hard. Like, so whenever I went into work, even though it was like, I really found it interesting to understand like Mastercard and how it worked as a company and stuff like that. And end of the day, I was just like, okay, what did I do today? I was used to like be doing, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 things during a day, working from 7 to 2 o'clock at next morning and stuff like 7 mornings, 2 o'clock next day. All of a sudden, I was like, I could go home at 5 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
And even though it was busy, a lot of meetings and like getting to know people and all that, I really felt that I wasn't moving any stones to the point where I actually went to the management of Mastercard and said, like, can you give me some kind of team and then let me do some kind of startup inside Mastercard? And they were just like, no, we can't do that because that would be pulling rank on a lot of people, right? And I completely understood that. And then I also knew at that time it was probably time for me to start moving on because I would not be happy in there. And I needed something else to be working on, right? So I went out of Mastercard and started investing instead and like trying to get back into new startups and stuff like that. But I think it was a super hard time. The parties and also the early states. I think you remember that too. Sometimes it felt a bit like we were the zoo, and like all the new guys from Mastercard, they came by to see like all the different funny animals. Like we did a lot of things differently than that they were used to. So they wanted to understand like how we became so successful as a little team, right? But I found that part really enjoyable, and then also seeing how all the people from Aiia got plugged into the Mastercard system, like you also, like where you ended up like doing stuff globally and all that. It's just like, it was crazy to just watch like how people, they kind of flew out and got all these positions and started changing also Mastercard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's also just like your character, Rune. Like you deep down just want to help people. And I think that shows also in everything you say today. And I wanted to kind of go back to you because then when we got acquired and then as you reflected and were like, okay, I should probably move on. How was it to be on that other side? You went into angel investment and looking back and have left behind both Spiir and Aiia over the time. How did that feel? And to your point, what you were saying, like you spent so much time away from your family to build up what you have succeeded with selling to Mastercard, and then leaving it all behind. How was that?
In the beginning, it was actually great, like reconnecting with the family and just like being there, like every morning doing like the breakfast and like driving the kids to school and all that. And then after a while, I started like also missing like that energy. And then I got it a bit from the investments, right? I had this strategy that I wanted to invest into 5 companies, fairly high tickets, so a lot of money for each investment, and then kind of really own a fair share so I would be able to do what I did with Spiir and stuff, just more as an investor. But I think what I realized there was also it's super hard to come in as an investor and then be the kind of person that I am, that is super opinionated, I have all these ideas and stuff, because the founders, they want to realize themselves, right? Which is also the whole premise. Like you shouldn't be doing their work, right? So that was a learning curve for me also. And today I'm in few companies, but companies where I know I play a significant role. So I'm kind of investing, but also working in the companies that I own today, which is a really good model for me. And then lately we also started like fleshing out an idea that we want to do ourselves again, like the original Spiir co-founder team is working on something new. Yeah.
When you then look back and seeing what you left behind, you're seeing someone else taking over your creation, your baby, what you have brought to life to help people, instead of being within it and having a control over it, then being on the outside and looking back in. Did that change? Did that mean anything to you?
I mean, actually, not really, because I think the moment that we realized that we were going to kind of sell everything, um, I also kind of made up with myself that okay, that means I'm no longer in control. I
Yeah.
shouldn't play kind of like it's the role I used to have in the company, and I spent a long time with the like management of Mastercard, like trying to make them understand that whenever I pushed back, it was from the hired role as a regulated CEO of a regulated company, right? There was a lot of things that you had to understand, like about Danish regulation and stuff like that. And sometimes I was misunderstood for being like the sorry founder that kind of felt that that I lost control of my company, right? But I never really had that. Like to me, it was like it's yours now, and remember to use all of us that built it wisely, because otherwise you just left with a lot of technology and you have to figure out how to use it, right? And so that was more, I think, the approach for me. I still think on the whole kind of creativity side, the thing that today I would say, I think open banking has moved too slow. So I would definitely have loved to see Aiia like working on the path in this doing, right? Like generating payments the way we did in Finland on bank-to-bank account infrastructure was like super significant, I think. And some of that was cut off. Like we didn't see as much of that because the customer approach from Mastercard was different than ours, right? It's bigger customers. It's not the fintechs necessarily that they engage with because like they're too small for a big company like Mastercard. In many senses, of course, they have Lighthouse and all that. So I would have loved to see like the whole infrastructure idea flesh out. Today we have enabled banking and nordics and others that are doing some of that. So it's not gone. I just think we had a very unique approach. We were really good at doing the NPIs correctly and supporting companies using them. Right? I still think on the Spiir part, that was the original idea that started everything for me. And I don't feel that I solved it, to be honest. Even though we came close and we had a lot of users and people are super happy about Spiir, it didn't solve the problem. It solved most of it, but it didn't solve the problem. There was too many kind of unsolved areas, and that bothers me, right? But that's why I want to see today, like, will a lot of companies, will a lot of new young people pick up on this and build something? And I put myself out there and said, like, anyone who's building, I'll do free advice, right? So I'll spend some. I already have like 3 meetings next week just to give like my ideas off to someone. And it's not something I want. Like, I'm not doing it to look at like, could this be an early investment or anything? No, I'm not investing into this space. I'm just giving like whatever I did invest as a person onto someone else that wants to do the same. Right. And then I hope that we will see the next kind of personal finance AI for you and me. And I would gladly use that if someone built the great thing, right? Because I'm going to miss Spiir as well. I think I used it since 2010. I'm user number 2. Thomas, the guy that I'm building a new company with, he's user number 1, right? I still remember we created our users manually in database because we didn't have an interface yet. And we like kept those users. They're kind of like our pride somehow. And those guys are being erased as well, right? In the database in the summer, right? It's a strange feeling, right? That your ideas kind of vaporize eventually. I'm not criticizing like Mastercard because I think it's the right move for them to do. I'm just saying, as a person that generates ideas that you really want to like get out there and use to solve something, it's strange to be in a position where all of a sudden someone says, "We'll just close down that idea." Right? But again, I think 15 years, it's a huge success in itself. Like how many PFM apps have survived in the market for that many years, right? And without a business model. I think that part is even...
That's quite extraordinary.
Exactly.
But I think we talked about it yesterday when I called you up as well. You know, you could look at it from two angles. One being, you know, okay, they announced that they're shutting it down, and you could be like, well, I exited, job done, and cynical and be like, that was it. Or you could be more attached to it and feel like, to what you're saying here, that the job was not quite done yet, and you feel that there is this empty gap, and that even though you're saying it makes sense for them, but again, because of that creative approach and mindset, that it just feels lost in some way.
Yeah. I remember in 16 when we created the little Spiir guy and the assistant kind of approach to the whole Spiir concept. There was a UK company that did the same, and they started talking about AI. And in the beginning, I was looking at it, it's just like, okay, you have to talk to a finance, so you have to ask for someone to generate a chart instead of just seeing the chart. Yeah. And I found that quite silly, right? Because you have to write and write and write. They kept going, and today they are probably the best proof that there is a lot of business to be made if you figure that out, like how to make business on something like Spiir or personal finance. I think they reach, and it's very similar to Spiir. It's like an assistant that has like AI capabilities, and it kind of categorizes your data and helps you spend your money wisely, right? And then you can get some there's some lending in there. There's some like affiliate marketing on insurance companies, yada yada. Yeah. They do more than 100 million USD ARR on a PFM net, right? So it's not trivial. You can actually make a lot of money. When we created Spiir, we saw something called Mint.com from US that was acquired by another like bigger player in 2009 for 180 million USD in 2009, right? So people have been making a lot of value from these platforms. So I think like the ones that want to try it out, solve that part. Like do you want to create a subscriber model for a platform like that and have the users pay so you don't need to put in affiliate marketing or something? Or do you have a genius way of using the data to actually give your users exactly what they need? Like you kind of need this insurance company, you need this, right? You need this subscription with this kind of company, you need this. That would be genius in my opinion, but that's the hard approach. It's easier just to say it's like $10 a month.
Yeah. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how this is going to evolve also with what you're saying, accounting companies and money management apps and AI now being that interface where you just prompt or speak to get support and help. And then maybe one day you don't even need to do anything. It will just figure it out because of, all sorts of new technologies or displaying on tables and whatnot because of eyewear and inserts and stuff.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close to that. And if you saw them like the move with Sam Altman bringing in Jonathan Ive from previous from Apple and all that to build the device that will replace the iPhones.
The ultimate device.
Yeah, exactly. And if you saw these Claude bots that are running on Mac Minis, right, they are actually personal assistants, and you engage with them through WhatsApp or whatever you want to use, right? And then you can put them to work for you, right? They can do a lot of things, right? So we're already seeing like the edges of this, and eventually you and I, we will have some kind of device involved in this. Like how you see today is you can, in Google Meetings, you'll see like this AI transcriber, right? Paul, the transcriber. And there's a lot of these guys. And then sometimes when you have board meetings, you need to tell people to close their AIs because otherwise they will transcribe even the board's own time, like where the CEO might be sitting outside. But yes, his AI is still transcribing. So it's like all these things are coming together, and eventually you and I, we will have an augmented reality through some kind of assistant that does our errands, right? Like if we talk about meeting next week, they would already be looking up in our calendars what time would be fitting for Rune and Christy to meet. And then they would eventually figure it out, and we just rely on them to figure that out. So we just tell each other, hey, it could be nice to meet up next week. I'm in Copenhagen. Hey, when are you there? Like Tuesday. Okay, let's see if we can meet. And boom, boom, we have a meeting in our calendars because our AI is figured out when that time should be, right? That's going to happen. And the same when you buy things in the store, that would be added to your total kind of like personal finance overview, and you'll be getting like a story behind your ear saying like, hey, you're actually getting close to the limits you want to spend on, I don't know, shoes this quarter. Which is probably what we need to a degree, right? Because it's too easy to overspend these days.
Yeah. And be like, I do need that pair of sneakers.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen, because again, the phones are listening to us already. So they do have access to the data because they bring everything in anyway. So it's just a matter of time. And I must say, like, as a solo entrepreneur and with Patreon, I would love to not have to worry about the ORS report, right? The annual reporting and the VAT and tax and whatever we have all been through recently. It would be wonderful not to have to worry about it. You're just fixed.
Yeah. You should pay attention to what we are building then.
I definitely will. And one of the values that we had at Spiir and Aiia was being brutally honest. And I want your brutal honesty, because if you are to look back, and also with today's fintech founders, we talked a little bit about, I almost interpret it as today's fintech founders are quite in a luxurious position, because back in the day when you created Spiir, you didn't have a Nordic fintech or a fintech lab, and there was not all these hubs and locations to go to for support and advice. But also this dilemma that you mentioned earlier. If you were to found, which you're alluding to, but in that process of being a fintech founder, what would you say, looking back, is the big thing you would do differently, or that you think should be done today due to how the ecosystem is organized, also with fundraising and everything else that's also new since what happened, 15 years ago?
That's a really good question. I think we did many things kind of pretty advanced at the time where we launched Spiir. We got a lot of traction just because we had a kind of a landing page thinking, right? We had a conversion funnels and stuff like that from day one back in 2010. Like no one else were doing these things, right? But it's because we came from eBay. We were used to be working like that. We were working with like billions of users actually on a daily plan, right? Building technology, tracking users, and we figured out like what kind of commercial arrangement to show them where and stuff like that. So all that we brought into the startup world at a time where I didn't see much of that. I think if I really had to look in the mirror and say like, why did you do that part? That would be why I insisted on like soloing it so much, like not bringing in VCs, for instance. We didn't have any VCs at any point involved in the company, which is also a wise thing if you think about it, that we were actually alive from 2011 until we got like the investment from Danske Bank. That was in 18 or 19 or something, right? That's a lot of years, and it wasn't Lars Koling alone that funded it. The way we did it was that I had a lot of money saved up from my job at eBay because I was paid a lot. I also had a lot of wines, I remember, and I went out looking at them and so like trying to kind of figure out like how long will they like survive? Like how few of them can I drink when, and then have them for the next 2 years because I won't be able to buy new wines, right? So we kind of like funded, they really bootstrapped it. We got 0 pay the first 3 years. And then we got like 30,000 DKK, which is nothing, right? For the next 3 years. So we were funding the company. And then when we had to pay our lawyers' bills, when the banks attacked us for building the whole kind of like aggregation approach on top of our own kind of access to the banks, we paid that through software consultancy. So we ended up building inside Spiir a huge software consultancy company that actually built a lot for Lego, that helped build the payment platform for Hungry.dk, that actually built the whole first version of Templify, which is a huge company today, right? All of that while building Spiir. And I just think about like, what if we didn't have to do that? Like why on earth ended we up doing that instead of just focusing on bringing Spiir forward? Because I think in that period of time, we probably lost somewhat eyesight of what was the vision behind Spiir and how to solve it. Because we were so busy, right? Like we worked full time as consultants. And then when we were done doing that, we had to work more than full time on Spiir because we were a small team. I would do that differently today. And I think like with the new company that we're starting up, we're already talking about whether we should bring in like fairly large scale capital early on. Because like today, everything is about the time you spend, right? Like every developer is kind of 10xing themselves with AI, and like everyone is talking about now you can build a SaaS company just during a weekend and yada yada. End of the day, the speed of innovation just like exponentially grows right now. And if you build a company that doesn't support that kind of speed, you will be out innovated very soon.
Yeah.
And therefore, today you need to bring in capital to move really quick on the ideas you have, because otherwise someone else or even AI companies themselves will solve this. Right? If you look at like the whole bookkeeping space, eventually, like Cloud Code that launched in MyFirst, they didn't really launch it publicly because it was like too scary, right? It found so many vulnerabilities and insecurities in Windows, in Mac OS, in OpenBSD that they couldn't launch it because it would destroy the world. So they instead launched a project where they sit with Microsoft and have MyFirst fixed all the security vulnerabilities, and the same with Mac OS and stuff like that, because they don't dare to launch it because it will like expose something that we can't recover from. Like they're getting so smart, these models, without being really sentient yet, that pretty soon even the world of finance will be kind of swallowed, right? Yeah. And I think Ken from Luna, he said in an interview yesterday in Sweden or something that like apps are disappearing, and it's going to happen super fast, right? There won't be a front. Everything will be invisible. It just happens for you. The stuff that we talk about in Aiia also, that like eventually payments are not interesting because the future currency will be loyalty and trust, right? That's what you exchange. It's not like the money. The money itself is just a transaction that happens far away in the background, automatically through AIs negotiating with each other, right? I think 2 years time, we have a lot of these things going on already. That's the speed of innovation right now, or the pace of innovation. So if you build a company and you think you can build it like 3 guys like we did, and then being 6 after a year or something, you won't succeed. We can succeed with AI, but you need to get like 100,000 customers within the first year to really become a success. Because eventually everyone will just turn and say, my AI will fix that. So if you have to build something that is for AI, not using AI.
It's a really interesting take, because also there's a little bit of an overwhelming factor in the market as well, because everyone is trying to catch up with figuring out what's going on, how to utilize it. And then, we went from a chat-based AI where we were prompting to not what you're saying now. You don't need to do anything. You just need to make sure you build for agents, because you will have 2 AI agents speaking to each other, right? So even that shift came quite fast as well. So there's just this feeling in the market in terms of overwhelming, of constantly just having to figure out what in heaven's name is going on, and how do I then fit into all of that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you do products today, I don't know if you still do that, but I don't use Figma. I don't use like whatever tools to kind of build mock-ups and stuff like that, because we never really get to the mock-up stage, because you just build some kind of design system and then you put that in as a skill to some kind of AI environment, and then there's a designer in there that takes care of all that from a code perspective, right? And then you just talk about features, and in the background, the tech leaders of the crowds of AIs, they start picking up your talk and they start building. Sometimes we've been like talking for 20 minutes and then we have the feature on our screens, right? that we're talking about, because they build it in the background while we talk.
It is.
That's a very strange world.
It's incredible how fast things go. One thing as we are moving to the end, Rune, that I really wanted to hear from you is around the exit. Because now when you're saying also, what would you have done differently as a founder looking back? But what would you say you're taking with you now into your next adventure when it comes to exits? Are there anything you would have done differently, or would definitely make sure you take a different approach to?
I think first of all, realizing whether you want to exit or not is super important. So whenever I do investments today, that's the first question I ask people. When we sat down, like the founders team of the company I'm building right now, that was the first discussion we had. It was not product. It's like, if we build this product, do we want to kind of like make this our company that supports us and our families for the rest of our lives, and perhaps even like future generations? And do we want to build something that should be exited to someone that then can operate it, right? And I think it's super important to know this, like not to do what we did, like, just put five years in the AO already. We don't know what it means. Yeah, exactly. No, but actually be very consistent about it, because it changes your perspective of things and how you build business plans and who's important, like who's important as a partner and all that. It kind of fits together with the narrative you build towards what would be the future exit partner of your company, right? So be very kind of consistent on that. I think it's like as early as possible. It's really, really great. And the other part is probably like, I really try to teach many of the founders the value of business planning. I don't know if you remember in our company when we were fairly advanced with that, like every December, everyone was busy, like all the teams were busy kind of supplying materials for the business plan.
Yes.
And what I really loved about that was I knew that in January, when I presented the final business plan, everyone could recognize it because everyone took part in creating it. So there was kind of not like an alienating kind of, here's the vision and you need to create this amount of revenue in the sales team, yada.
Go and do.
The sales, the sales team, they saw their own numbers in there, right? The developers, they saw their own features and like the requests, like how many people do we need to be to create this roadmap, was kind of supported in the plans. Like building that and then making sure that you have all the supporting documentation around that. So when you start the exit process, you don't need to, from scratch, which I think we did a lot, create the data rooms, right? I think many startups today, they are more advanced in that sense because they know the idea of a data room. They start building it as part of the VC journey and all that. But I think I would definitely make sure to do those things in future endeavors, or even if just like doing advisory for startups, because that's the time-consuming part, and it's not the fun part. Like building all that documentation, and like I remember like sitting with someone from finance going through a budget that we had to send to Mastercard that eventually would be used to multiplying our revenue towards what would they be paying for the company, and it was a huge mistake in there. And I was just like, what? And I stayed there until 1:00 in the night to figure out like what was the mistake. And when we found additional 3 million in revenue that we wouldn't have reported. And if they multiply revenue, right, they could have like that deal could have been like 100 million less just because of that mistake, right? So like take that part seriously and involve yourself. Don't like think just because you have a CFO or CMO, or like be very like transparent with these people that you are the founder and you want everyone to succeed, but you are also paying attention to all the details, because a lot of people, they tend to delegate too much in those processes, which is not healthy.
Yeah. Rune, as we come to an end, is there anything when we talk about learnings from, building a startup, selling a startup, to then witness it to be killed at the end? Are there anything you want to share, or anything you want to share before we wrap up?
I spoke a lot about like the creative side of things, right? Like you can have these ideas as a human being, and they are not necessarily related to a company. It's just your ideas, and then you build a company to try to execute it, and that company will not be the same as you and your ideas. I think I try to teach everyone working with me in the Spiir company, in the Aiia company, that whatever you build in there, regardless of how much we try to drive the best out of every effort we do, it's never about you. At the moment you build it, the moment you put it into the mix, you're gone. It's the product. And therefore, you can criticize it, you can change it, you can hate it, you can love it. And you're not hurting people because you're not kind of discussing whether the designer is really bad at doing UX, because he did at that time, or she did what was needed in some kind of like feature build up, right? I think that part is super important, and that also goes for like the end of things, right? So I don't really mind the Spiir guy to be gone. I think he had his time, and the whole kind of concept, the way we expressed it and the way we put efforts into building that product had its time. I think Spiir itself as a product, if that could speak, would be super proud about being where it was today, and like actually solving connectivity issues all over Europe in the end, right? Generating a lot of users just to do that part, right?
Yeah,
Must have
that
been
was pretty cool. That was really cool.
yes. So if Spiir was an AI and it was sentient, it would be pop, I think.
Yeah.
And then it's probably with technologies, just like with dogs, right? Every year a dog lives, you tend to say it's around 7 or 8 human years, right? So if this is 15 years times 8, that's more than most humans they live, right? So I think it's just time to say goodbye, and like, thanks for that little guy and the efforts that we all put into that, because my ideas are still the same, but the product that we created as part of those ideas belongs to the product itself, right? And the company itself. And there will be new companies trying to express different ways of these ideas, and founders that have totally different ideas around like how to solve personal finance that I did. So I'm just happy to see what kind of energy will be released from Spiir that generates new things.
Yeah, it is. It is nice that it's like it's an end, but it's also a new beginning, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think, looking back for myself now, it was such an amazing journey to be part of. Like I came in 19 as the focus was on Aiia more than Spiir at that time, with my focus as the CMO. And it was so much fun. It was fucking hard work, excuse me my language, but it was super fun. And I don't think I have learned as much in such an intense period of time than what I did with you and everyone else. And it was to what you said earlier as we started, that experience in a startup, specifically Aiia and with Spiir, made who I am the way I think today. And like it feels like a little goodbye to the little green man and everything, right? But it's that was amazing. It really was.
But as a funny note, I remember going into Danske Bank's office when they invested. Lars Malmberg, he was like head of strategy or something at Danske Bank at that time. He had a corner office at Kongens Nytorv and all that.
Yeah.
And then I came in there to kind of like have a chat with him. And I saw there was like this kind of like figure, this Spiir figure there. I was like, why do you have that? That's a tombstone we get from the lawyers when we finalize the deal. And I was just like, okay. I started thinking about like, why do they call it a tombstone?
Yeah.
Kind of right, because Danske Bank, they have the tombstone for Spiir somewhere in their offices. And I think they should like put that out today. Put it out on Kongens Nytorv, right?
That's so funny. I need to find one of my colleagues in Danske Bank and figure out if that lives somewhere.
I think it's there.
That's so funny.
Yes.
Rune, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I think it felt like the right moment to pick up, and I wanted to have you on my podcast forever and ever, but I was waiting for that right moment, and I felt like what happened this week with the announcement of Spiir closing down just felt like now was the right time for us to sit and have this conversation. And just as always, it's always fun and pleasure and insightful and a joy to speak with you, Rune. So thank you so much for joining my Patreon podcast.
Thank you for allowing me. It was really great. I also enjoyed talking to you, Christy.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you have feedback, topic ideas, or guest recommendations, we are all ears. Pantrum is growing thanks to our community of listeners. So if something resonated with you, we would love for you to share your favorite takeaways. And just a quick note. The views shared by our guests are entirely their own and don't necessarily reflect the companies they work for. That's it for now. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time.